It was just past 8:30 a.m. when the city of Atlanta stirred to life. Coffee shops buzzing, commuters rushing, and courtroom floors already echoing with footsteps. Among them, Judge Simone Brooks, one of the youngest black women ever appointed to the state's Supreme Court, quietly prepared for a case that had the eyes of the nation watching. She didn't travel with a security detail or wear flashy robes outside court. Just a clean-cut navy pantsuit, calm confidence, and her ID badge clipped to her chest. To most passers-by, she was just another professional black woman heading to work. But for Officer Michelle Porter, sitting alone in her cruiser a block from the courthouse, her own prejudices saw something else. As Judge Brooks slowed at a stop sign in her sleek gray sedan, Officer Porter flicked on her lights and pulled in behind her. No cause, no traffic violation, just a gut decision, based on skin. The lights in Simone's mirror didn't shake her. She pulled over carefully, turned off the ignition, and lowered her window. "Good morning, officer. Is there a reason?" Before she could finish, Officer Porter was already at her window, hand resting on her belt. "License and registration. Step out of the vehicle." Simone blinked. "I'm a Supreme Court judge. I'm due in session shortly. May I ask why I've been stopped?" Porter's jaw tightened. She didn't like the calm tone. She didn't like being questioned. "I said out." Simone, though surprised, stayed measured. She unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door slowly, and stood. "I'll gladly cooperate," she said, reaching into her pocket to present her ID badge. That's when it happened. A loud, open-handed slap. Gasps echoed from across the street. A man on a scooter slowed, pulling out his phone. A woman on the corner froze mid-step. Porter didn't even blink. She grabbed Simone's wrist and shoved her back against the hood. "You think throwing a title at me is going to work? Not today." Simone's eyes didn't blink, didn't water, but her voice dropped into something colder than steel. "You just struck a sitting Supreme Court judge," she said slowly. "In front of witnesses." On camera, Porter scoffed, still holding her arm. "Yeah? Prove it." And just like that, across the street, a city parking officer spoke into her walkie. "Get HQ on the line. We've got a problem, a big one." Within minutes of the incident, the atmosphere around the courthouse transformed from a routine morning to a frenzy of shock and outrage. News vans began pulling up outside the building, their satellite dishes already pointed skyward. Social media platforms lit up with live streams and video clips capturing every shocking moment. The flashing lights of Officer Porter's cruiser, the stolen image of a black Supreme Court judge standing tall after being slapped, and the officer's cold, unrepentant expression frozen on camera. Inside the courthouse lobby, Judge Simone Brooks remained calm and resolute, even as murmurs of disbelief and anger reverberated through the crowd. Court reporters and onlookers gathered near the entrance, their smartphones recording every detail. For many, this incident was not just an isolated moment of abuse. It was a stark reminder of a broken system that had long devalued black lives. Judge Brooks quickly convened an emergency meeting with her administrative staff. In her office, a sanctuary lined with law books and framed inspirational quotes, she reviewed the rapidly accumulating evidence. Video recordings, social media reactions, and statements from witnesses who had been on the scene. With every piece of evidence, her determination grew. This assault wasn't merely a personal affront, it was a symbol of systemic racism that needed to be eradicated. Meanwhile, Officer Michelle Porter, still in the glare of public exposure, was escorted into a conference room by internal affairs investigators. Her once confident stance had crumbled. The power she had wielded now turned against her. Within minutes, higher-ups from the police department were summoned. Rumors spread quickly among the ranks. Complaints long ignored were now being reopened, and several officers with similar records were quietly put on administrative leave. Back in the courtroom, the judge's words resonated beyond her case docket. "Today's events are a reminder," Simone stated firmly during a press conference held in a makeshift media room within the courthouse, "that no one is above accountability. We must all stand united against injustice and racial prejudice, whether it comes from within our police force or our judicial system." Her declaration sent shockwaves through the community. Civil rights groups, already waiting for a catalyst, organized spontaneous vigils and marches demanding justice and reform. Prominent legal scholars and activists began calling for an independent review of police conduct, particularly in cases involving racial bias. The officer's reckless act became the spark that ignited a long-simmering call for transparency and accountability in law enforcement. As the investigation unfolded, Judge Brooks worked tirelessly to ensure that the aftermath of this incident would not be swept under the rug. Meetings with state officials, community leaders, and legal experts were held behind closed doors. She drafted recommendations for mandatory anti-bias training, stronger oversight measures for police behavior, and a review of any case handled by Officer Porter and her cohorts. Every step of the way, her resolve was clear. The assault on her dignity was only the beginning of dismantling a corrupt system. Outside, the public's response was overwhelming. Support poured in from across the nation. Social media hashtags rallied around the cause. Local news segments featured heartfelt interviews with citizens, and protests demanded swift justice. The ripple effect was undeniable. A single moment of defiance by a black judge was turning into a nationwide movement calling for change. By the end of the day, as the courthouse doors closed and the city settled into an uneasy night, Judge Brooks knew that her empire, the very institution she helped build over years of hard work and dedication, was under threat from within. And though the assault on her person had been repulsive, it had become the catalyst for a much larger reckoning. The fight for justice, accountability, and equality had just entered a new urgent phase. The next morning, as Atlanta's skyline glowed under a golden sunrise, the local courthouse buzzed not with routine, but with revolution. The assault on Judge Simone Brooks had made national headlines overnight. Her calm yet unshakable response, paired with clear footage of the slap, ignited a firestorm across legal and civil rights communities. But the storm brewing behind closed doors was far more dangerous for those who had long hidden behind the system. Officer Michelle Porter sat in a private room inside Internal Affairs headquarters, pale and silent. Gone was her arrogance. Gone was the badge from her chest and the gun from her belt. Her hands trembled slightly as a flat screen on the wall replayed the viral footage over and over. "You just struck a sitting Supreme Court judge." Those words echoed in the room like thunder. Two agents stood across from her, their folders thick with reports. But what disturbed Porter most was not the footage. It was what they already knew. "Ms. Porter," the lead agent began, "this isn't just about yesterday. You've had 12 complaints of excessive force in the last 7 years, 4 of them involving black civilians. All buried, all dismissed." He leaned forward, voice low. "Not anymore." One by one, previously ignored names were listed. A young black teen wrongfully arrested and hospitalized. A Latina mother verbally abused and unlawfully detained. A homeless man whose ribs were broken during an undocumented stop. All cases tied to Porter. All of them now reopened. But she wasn't alone. Internal Affairs had quietly launched simultaneous investigations into 5 other officers who had covered for her, written falsified reports, or conveniently lost dashcam footage. Their protection was built on a code of silence and powerful backing. That silence was breaking. Meanwhile, inside Judge Brooks's chambers, the walls were filled with calls, emails, and letters from all over the country. Law schools reached out to host her as a guest speaker. Federal officials contacted her to assist in drafting new bias reform measures. Civil rights attorneys sent her old cases tied to Officer Porter, begging for them to be reviewed. Simone didn't bask in the spotlight. She used it. Every interview she gave, every word she spoke, was sharp, strategic, and aimed directly at the system that had failed so many for so long. In a closed-door meeting with Georgia's Attorney General, Simone presented a 23-page document detailing systemic issues rooted in the police department Porter had served. "The slap wasn't the start of her corruption," Simone said coldly. "It was just the first time the world saw it." City Hall buzzed with panic. Leaders who had once turned a blind eye now faced scrutiny. A leaked memo revealed that Porter had political protection. Her uncle, a former deputy commissioner, had shielded her career through backroom deals and threats of retaliation. Now that network was collapsing. Outside, the protests grew larger, but more organized. Students marched with signs reading, "Simone stood, so we speak," and badge not equal to immunity. Families affected by police violence found hope for the first time in years. The streets no longer belonged to fear. They belonged to truth. Judge Brooks stood at the window of her office, watching a young black girl hold a homemade poster that read, "I want to be just like you." She turned away slowly and whispered, "Then I have to finish this fight." And finish it she would, not just for herself, but for every soul the system tried to silence. The quiet war inside the city's power structure had officially gone public. The slap that Officer Michelle Porter delivered was no longer seen as a moment of aggression. It had become a symbol of a deeply embedded sickness, and the medicine was coming fast and hard. At City Hall, emergency meetings were called. The mayor's office was flooded with calls demanding the removal of senior officials who had long supported officers like Porter. Protesters surrounded the steps holding signs that read, "Resign or be removed," and "The system protected her, now we won't protect it." Judge Simone Brooks, though still recovering emotionally, wasted no time. She convened a coalition of civil rights lawyers, retired judges, and community activists. Together, they prepared a massive judicial review task force. Their first goal? Reopen every single case tied to Officer Porter's name. The second? Investigate the judicial officers who ignored complaints filed by victims of police misconduct. But what made this movement unlike any other was Simone's unique position. She wasn't an outsider shouting at the system. She was sitting at the heart of it. Porter's former captain was suspended after internal memos revealed that he had destroyed complaint records. The police union, once fiercely defensive of its officers, released a cold, one-line statement. "We do not condone the actions of Officer Michelle Porter." Simone, standing in her black robe on the steps of the courthouse, addressed the public once more. "You don't reform corruption with silence. You burn it down with truth." The Department of Justice launched an official civil rights investigation into Atlanta's police department. Their preliminary report labeled the environment as hostile, racially charged, and systematically negligent. City officials were given 60 days to implement structural reforms or face a federal consent decree. But the most powerful moment came during a televised courtroom hearing, this time with Michelle Porter in the defendant's chair. Cameras flashed as Judge Simone Brooks entered the courtroom. She didn't preside that day. She stood as a witness. With a calm but firm voice, she told the jury, she didn't slap a judge. She slapped justice itself. And now justice is standing back up. The courtroom was silent. Porter sat, broken and pale. Her empire of unchecked power turned into rubble by a woman she had tried to humiliate. But the fall didn't stop with her. Over a dozen names, officers, administrators, clerks, were red flagged for misconduct and obstruction. The chief of police submitted his resignation before the governor demanded it. Reforms were passed that same month. New body cam regulations, independent civilian review boards, and the disbanding of the internal blue wall policy that once protected bad cops. Judge Simone Brooks was honored at the National Bar Association for her integrity and courage. But in her speech, she said only one line. This wasn't justice served. It was justice restored. As she walked off the stage, a woman approached her in tears. It was the mother of a man who had been wrongly imprisoned years ago because of Officer Porter's falsified testimony. She held Simone's hands and whispered, "Because of you, he's getting a second chance." Simone hugged her tightly and simply said, "That's why we fight." 3 months had passed since that single slap, a moment that began as a hateful act of authority and bloomed into a national reckoning. In those 3 months, the city's justice system had seen more transformation than it had in decades. Officer Michelle Porter had been convicted of civil rights violations, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. Her sentence wasn't just prison, it was public disgrace. The very courtroom she once walked through with arrogance now echoed with her name in shame. Her badge, once a symbol of unchecked control, had been stripped and crushed under the weight of truth. But while Porter faded into the margins of a broken legacy, Judge Simone Brooks became something more than a name in the legal world. She became a symbol. Under her leadership, over 40 previously silenced cases were reopened. More than a dozen wrongfully convicted individuals walked free. Among them was a young man, Deshaun Bell, who'd spent 5 years behind bars due to Porter's false report. When he walked out of prison, his first stop wasn't home. It was Judge Brooks's chambers. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "You gave me back my life." Simone smiled, but her voice stayed strong. "Now use it to help someone else." The city implemented wide-reaching reforms. An independent justice oversight board was formed with Simone at its head. Police training programs were rewritten with an emphasis on cultural sensitivity, accountability, and transparency. For the first time, judges, police officers, and civilians sat at the same table, not to argue, but to rebuild. National networks called her the face of modern justice. Law schools played her hearings and ethics classes. Young black girls showed up to the courthouse steps holding signs that read, "I want to wear the robe too." And Simone? She never once made it about herself. In her final public statement, before returning to her normal docket, she stood at the courthouse steps, the same place she had stood bruised and shaken, and looked into the sea of faces that now chanted her name with pride. She said, "Justice is not a moment. It's a commitment. And when the system fails, it is our duty not to walk away, but to rise up and fix it. We are not here to be silent. We are here to be heard." The crowd erupted. And as Simone turned to walk back into the halls of justice, she carried no bitterness, no vengeance, just purpose, because the slap meant to silence her only made her louder.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.